welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm Dr. Greer, and I'm joined today with Linda Willitts, who's worked with us for about 13 or 14 years on the CSETI and Disclosure Project endeavors. And we're going to be talking about something rather exciting this afternoon. We have just returned in the last few days from a week out under the stars in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, and we have had some really amazing contact experiences and what some would call almost Vedic, mysterious manifestations while we were out there. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks, and I do appreciate their time and support. One of the things I wanted, by introducing this, is give a little background. We were in an area called Crestone, Colorado, which is a small community up against the west side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in southern Colorado. There's a very large range of over 14,000-foot peaks just north of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. And we have been going there now. This is our 18th year. We started going back in 1993 and have had some really astonishing experiences over the years in this area. It's known as the Mysterious Valley, and the actual name of it is the San Luis Valley. And it's such a huge valley, it can be seen from space and from the moon. It's about 200 miles long and about 50 miles wide. And it's at about 8,000 feet high, this valley, in between the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the San Juan Mountains to the west on the side of the valley. And we have been going there, and many of the experiences we've had there over the years are chronicled in the book Contact, Countdown the Transformation, which has a DVD with it that shows some of the amazing craft and experiences we've had at that site and in southern Colorado, and that can be found at disclosureproject.org. That report and book and the DVD are available now on that website, disclosureproject.org. But first I'd like to say that one of the things that happened this week when we arrived on Saturday was that we had a little house out in what's called the Baca, which is used to be a giant ranch of about 250,000 acres that we had rented. And the first night we were there was before the whole team came, which it was about 34 people. We were there with Dr. Bravo and Linda and myself, and we were out one evening that first night, and we were in this field behind the house, and we started noticing all kinds of electronic objects that had come in around us. In fact, Trudy Geiker, who's been on our team for many, many years, saw a green rectangular object float over by a pinyon tree, a very odd trans-dimensional sort of object, and I saw it a few seconds later in the same location. And it's interesting because a few years ago we were in the same area on the backside or south side of Blanca Peak, where we literally had this mysterious blue box that floated down off the mountain that was so manifest that one of the members of our team tried to sit on it. I mean, it was rather hilarious, and then it scooted away. It literally scooted away like, who are you kidding? And what we found is that we often will see these very unusual trans-dimensional ET objects in this area, which apparently have been reported going back to the time before Europeans settled the area with Native American stories and accounts of ET beings and spacecraft and strange objects being seen in this area. And so that very first night we were out, we had this unusual event take place while we were all gathered there just having our initial get-together. And later there was a second-floor balcony that was off of a sort of an office area of the top second floor of this house, which faced north towards the Sangre de Cristo Mountains from where the house was. And we went out there, and it was crystal clear, and you can see the whole Milky Way overhead, and it was just amazing up at 8,000 feet in that crystal clear Colorado air, which you could see. And suddenly, coming from the south and slightly in the western skies, this massive, very large blue-white object came in, which came in and curved and went over towards the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And it was, if you know the magnitudes on the satellite charts, for example, Venus is a -2. This probably would have been a -3 or 4, and meaning quite bright. And it came in and came overhead and turned and then vanished. And we instantly knew that it was this ET named Kindness in a craft that we have seen very prominently all over the world, but especially at this particular area. And if you've read the book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, we talk about this extraterrestrial entity that I was introduced to the night that my long-term assistant, Sherry Adamak, passed away. And it was this ET with a perfectly round head and beautiful almond-shaped eyes. And virtually every single training we've been on all over the world since 1998, we have seen this craft, which at times has literally stopped overhead and shown a brilliant blue-white light onto the group, which has actually happened there at Crestone, Colorado. So the very first night we were out, we had this beautiful sighting, as well as some of these unusual events in the backyard of this house that we had rented. So it started out, even before the whole team had assembled on that Sunday, as quite an exciting gathering there in the mysterious valley. The other thing I wanted to share is that when I first went there back in 93, I've learned that this particular area had a lot of local ranchers who had seen these craft. And there were actually stories of one that was shot down and crashed in the northern edge of the Great Sand Dunes back in the 60s, although we have not been able to confirm that. But that's one of the stories in the local area. We also learned that the local folks have a name for these very rapid, transdimensional, almost fluorescent white objects that come from the ground up that are seen. And these are called cheap fireworks by the local folks because they look like a firework going up. And the very first time I went into the San Luis Valley with Sherry Adamak back in 93, as we were driving in, we had a whole line of those that followed the car in and went ahead of the car and went up into space, and Sherry and I were just astonished. It was almost as if they were welcoming us there in the valley. So after that, we decided that this is the places we had to go to, and so we have this expedition to train people to be ambassadors to the universe and to make contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations once a year there in Crestone.
It's always amazing in Crestone. This was my 14th year there, and it never fails to amaze. And one of the really amazing things about this trip is Kindness always shows up during a training, but sometimes she's busy and can't make it every night apparently, but she made it not only every single night of this training, but sometimes twice a night. And that was really a wonderful effort on her part that we all appreciated, and some rather spectacular fly-ins by her as well.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that, there's a very characteristic quality to that craft. It's not a very large one. It seems to be a reconnaissance craft. And when it's been in the atmosphere, you can actually see it sort of disc-shaped and has a bluish-white corona around it. And we have quite a few good videotapes of this in the DVD that goes with this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, that's at disclosureproject.org. But one of the things that happened with this ET, who we've learned is a very senior, very spiritual being, but also a very senior ambassador from one of the star systems in deep space that are involved with Earth, is that she has a characteristic way of coming in and then making a curve and sometimes stopping and then shining this very bright light over us. In fact, we were with someone who trains people in remote viewing, Simeon Hine, years ago, a few years ago, up at the McGuire Ranch up in Wyoming, outside Laramie, in fact. And we were out there, and this craft came over and literally floated in, stopped over the group at some altitude, a few thousand feet high, and I had a pair of night scopes. At that time, I just had a first generation one, the sort of old KGB surplus night scopes, and a light unfurled. It didn't like it just turned on. It unfurled out from the underside of this disc and shone this blue-white light and literally illumined the entire ground and all the people. It's an amazing amount of contact, and I am quite convinced that Sherry Adamek, when she passed over to the worlds of light, because of her deep devotion to interstellar travel and civilizations and peace, made contact with this particular ET elder, for lack of a better word, and she has been connected to this project ever since, and that was in 1998, January of 1998. And anyway, the account of all these are in this new book. One of the things that also happened, now I have to say, since we're on the World Puja Network, I feel I can talk about what Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is the Air Force, the Blue Book guy, used to call high strangeness, a little more fully than I can on some radio shows. We had, as everyone who studied the ancient Vedas or read Paramahansa Yogananda's book or studied any of the teachings of the mystical teachings of the consciousness studies area, know about the concept of materialization and dematerialization. Of course, we've often talked on this program about how interstellar civilizations aren't going linearly through space. They're actually shifting resonantly through very sophisticated electronics into a higher, if you will, resonant frequency component that is transdimensional and dropping out, or if you want to say transcending linear space-time and going from one point in space very quickly to another point in space. Now, this also means that their ability to do this extends to objects, where objects that are not necessarily spacecraft can materialize or dematerialize. And over the years, we've had a number of anomalous and strange things with this kind of phenomenon. And, of course, if you've ever read stories of the great masters of the Himalayas, and it is also thought that, of course, Christ and other great enlightened beings have done this, where objects can be materialized from the etheric and astral energy field into linear space-time and fully materialized. And this is one of the cities, Siddhis, they're talked about in the Vedas, the ancient Vedas. And we know that in the traditions of not only ancient Egyptology and the teachings of Egypt, but also in the Vedas, that the idea, if you look at that, is that the tradition is that knowledge came from the sector of Sirius and Orion. And that there's an ancient star knowledge component to these very profound sciences of consciousness that have existed for thousands of years on Earth and within the teachings of the human tradition of spirituality and consciousness. Well, the reason I'm saying this is that the very first night that we went out with the whole team, we have a sandy site that we started using a few years ago. We call it the sandy site because it's a beautiful sandy field that sits on top of, I think it's the third largest aquifer in North America there in the San Luis Valley, and underwater aquifer. And it's out in the Baca and has just unparalleled views of the entire valley and the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and the Great Sand Dunes and Blanca Peak and the collegiate range up to the north, and it's just stunning and very, very private. And so the first night we gathered there, got there a little before sunset, and as we gathered, we had Dr. Bravo and myself and Linda, and there were maybe 3 or 4 other people who got there around the time we did before the whole group of 34 arrived. And we set up our chairs, and right behind my chair and where mine and Dr. Bravo's chair would meet, as it were, maybe a foot behind our chairs, Dr. Bravo looked down, and there was this perfect double pyramid-shaped fluorite crystal that materialized on the sand. And that was where no feet had been, could not have been sitting there for very long because there had been a tremendous wind and rainstorm the day before. It would have been totally blown over. And it was just sitting on top of the sand. And she picked it up, and of course, rationally, one would think, well, someone dropped this out of their bag. So we asked a few people that were there if anyone had such a crystal that they had dropped. No one had. No one had ever actually seen one like this. And we thought, my God, the ETs have welcomed us here with a gift. And it turns out that that's exactly what it was. And it was a fully materialized double pyramid fluorite crystal, maybe about an inch or so in height, just sitting on the sand as a gift right behind my chair. And it was really a very strange moment to realize that that's what it was. And this is the same site where a few years ago, and we've been going to this area at this altitude for many, many years. When we were on that site, we realized in remote view that there were ET craft in the aquifer underneath the earth and also in the mountains at Blanca Peak, which has often been called a spaceport. And when we were sitting there, we had a contact, and we started getting bubbles in our hermetically sealed compasses, which we've never had anywhere in the world at any altitude or temperature. And it was sort of a trans-dimensional physics. There was a physicist there who explained it. And these are hermetically sealed. And this was the same place where this object materialized. So it's a very unusual area that we're going to. And the materialization of this beautiful crystal was, I think, rather significant and a very special gift from some dimension, and I think it was from the ETs to us. So I have that here with me, and of course, if this was a TV show, I'd show it, but it's quite beautiful and actually has a strand of sort of purple that runs through it that's very beautiful. And I've never seen anything quite like it, but it just appeared there. It sort of manifested out of thin air, which we know is completely compatible with very advanced technologies. And in fact, even some of the scientists we've worked with who've done work for some of the three-letter agencies talk about the WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, as it's called, where they have dematerialized and rematerialized objects. And in fact, one of the Disclosure Project witnesses recounts technologies that he witnessed in 1953 at an Air Force base in Canada, where they were doing experimentation with these high-voltage electronic systems, where objects could be dematerialized and teleported and rematerialized across various distances. And to many people, I know this sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. It's science fact, and it's unfortunate all these things have been kept secret. And someday we hope that the knowledge and truth of this will come out. And when it does, it'll be a whole new civilization. But in the meanwhile, we're happy and we were thrilled about this little gift that appeared behind our seats there on that very first evening, even before the group started. And then shortly after that, another strange phenomenon happened. We had a beautiful, beautiful sunset that was just beyond words. And suddenly we looked over in the east and southeast, and the sun, of course, that time of year, being the solstice, is setting kind of in the west-northwest, and this was in the east-southeast. And we looked over the range, and it looked like a sunrise happening. And then we realized that it was a very strange phenomenon. No one had ever seen anything like it. It looked exactly like the fingers and the rays of a sunrise in the east. But, of course, it was at sunset. And it was some strange atmospheric and weather phenomenon. And the message we got on that is that this crystal had come from ET beings from a binary star system, a planet that had two suns, basically, which many planets do have. We have our one single sun in this solar system. And then we realized that Sirius, again, we're making full circle with the Vedic knowledge, there's Sirius A and Sirius B. And in fact, that perhaps it was from this civilization from the Sirius star system. So now that's speculating, but it was sort of an interesting coincidence and a very, very unusual natural phenomenon that happened, worth noting.
And, one other thing about that crystal appearing is that out of that whole rather large expanse of what looks like pure beach sand, we walked to a place in the field and set down our chairs. I actually didn't go behind the chairs, and that crystal was right behind where you set down your chair. It was, on pristine sand that hadn't been walked on by anyone. And on the top, not buried at all.
Right, it was laid right on top, and it's very, very odd. Because if a human had walked out there and placed it, it would have been footprints, and if it had been out there much earlier, it would have been blown over because of the wind and the loose sand like you would have on a beach where the sand shifts. So it's just another one of these unusual phenomena that we have happen all the time that's not that surprising if you understand interstellar transdimensional technologies, which you have to in order to be an ambassador to these people, because we're dealing with civilizations that are routinely using sciences of consciousness, but also physical sciences that would seem magical to most people on Earth today. But the only reason they would seem magical to most people on Earth today is that most people on Earth today have been lied to about these things, and the whole thing's been covered up because they want to keep people in ignorance. And we want to just shed a little bit of light on this to the extent we can in 2010 about what the potential is for living on Earth. And it certainly involves these very advanced sciences in consciousness, but also these very advanced material sciences that cross over into consciousness and that result in these sort of events taking place. And it is important because the way that we actually contact the ETs is to understand first the nature of the conscious mind and how it is an omnipresent field that can lead to the ability to remotely view distant places, make contact with these civilizations, show them where we're located, sort of vector them into the site, and have this sort of contact take place. And that's, of course, what these training programs are all about. And that's why we were there in Crestone, Colorado, is to train. There were 34 people there. It was a beautiful group. And by the way, for those of you who can get there, we're going to be doing one of these programs at Mount Shasta.
Mount Shasta, September 5th through 11th.
Right, so after the Labor Day weekend time period, so the 5th through the 11th of September, we're going to be up at Mount Shasta, where we've had so many amazing events take place over the years, and I hope those of you who have time free can join us there. So what else happened this week, Linda? I mean, there's so many events in the past.
One of the things I thought was very striking is the radar detectors, because I'll reiterate to people who may be new that I've had a cordless radar detector now for many years out there, and other people have as well. And maybe we would go a whole week of training. Many times it would never make a peep, or maybe would make a short burst once or twice, and usually it coincided with an astral being that you could actually see walk right by it. And then all of a sudden in November 2007 with the Orion transmissions, and ever since then, we have had tremendous radar detector activity from not only the radar detectors that started the whole thing with the Orion transmissions, but people who bring new radar detectors out there. They get in trained very quickly, and they're very reactive as well, to the point that I think people that come on trainings or workshops now just think there's a whole lot of racket going on, and they don't see the marvel in it that we do, because it's just unbelievable. And I know that people over the years have said that, they think that they're reacting off each other and this and that. And we obviously have done every combination and tried to see if there was any reactivity off each other, and there really is not. But I think one of the things that proved that to people during this training was our radar detectors. The escort that does the Orion transmissions did Orion transmissions the first night, and then we had several other, mostly Whistler brands, various models of Whistlers that also were very interactive the first night. And then the second night, they were almost silent. The Orion transmission escort didn't make one single peep the whole night. Some of the others did a little, but they were quite silent. And then later on in the week, the other days of the week, they were all more active again. So I think that was good proof to the people at this training that it wasn't just some phenomenon where they were reacting off each other, because if they were reacting off each other every night, they would be equally active every night.
Well, and we're out in a very remote area where there's no source for them to go off at all. In
right.
fact, if you have one in the car and you go by a police car or some kind of microwave tower, it's a very different sound than these are made. These are almost like in dialogue. They make these patterns of tones that are often unique to each detector, as if they take on a personality of the ET behind them, and it's what I call a transdimensional electronic communication. And the other thing that's quite remarkable is when we do a puja, and since we're on the World Puja Network, I'll talk about this. Whenever we do a puja, and we did this up at Blanca Peak at this overlook about 9,000 feet up one evening, they'll be very busy once I enter the circle and we start making contact, and there'll be all this sort of almost electronic conversation that happens through a couple of them. When we go to do the puja, they'll be on, but they'll be silent. It's as if they're participating in the sacred puja and in the sacred meditation, and they get completely silent. Then when we get back in our circle after the puja, they start again. Now, this is unbelievable, but it happens all the time now.
Right.
And so one of the things that people will ask, well, how is that happening with these electronics? I said, well, it's really quite easy to understand if you understand WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, and the transdimensional nature of interstellar civilizations. Remember, if you are traveling among the stars, which is what we're talking about here, you are moving at multiples of the speed of light. But you're not doing it linearly because you can't. You're actually going into a different dimension, what some would call the etheric or near astral and energy forms that are not linear. And that means that a craft or an ET being can be right on site, but not be visible with the naked eye, or perhaps with a camera. You might get some images like we did with this ET picture at Joshua Tree in November. If you go to CSETI.org, you'll see that picture of an ET being visiting us at Joshua Tree, November, Joshua Tree. But they can be right there, but they're within space-time. So I call it it's sort of an infra-space. It's not interspace. So everyone thinks in terms of linear, going from point A to B in a straight line. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sciences and technologies that permit a spacecraft or a person to be in a resonant field frequency that is beyond the speed of light, what I call the crossing point of light, where there you're in a transdimensional form. And so they're actually involving themselves with these electronics from within the circuitry, not by sending a beam of electromagnetic energy from point A to B. So I call it infraspace. They're coming from within space and communicating consciously with these detectors in a very, very specific way, to the point that we'll be, as a group, talking about something, and there's one detector in particular that'll go, every time we make a point that's correct, we'll go beep, beep, 2 beeps. And it's very strange. But we've taken it now as sort of a matter of course, but it's sort of astonishing and confusing to people, I think, initially. But we're finding that this is often what happens with these interstellar civilizations. And that's another reason why the training involves this deep understanding of the puja, the meditative state, the science of consciousness, and the ancient Vedas. Because if you have that knowledge, then these interstellar civilizations and how they manifest and materialize and contact people in all these sort of odd and strange ways, what Dr. J. Allen Hynek used to call just high strangeness, and he really didn't have a paradigm because he was an astronomer and a conventional science-trained guy. he didn't have a framework for understanding it except to say that it was strange or weird. But in reality, there's a science behind it, and it's an understandable science, but it's bringing together ancient Vedic knowledge and the science of consciousness with modern transdimensional electronic sciences, which unfortunately up till now have been classified and kept very, very secret. But I think it's time for that information to be known, but not only known, but put into an operational paradigm, which is what we're doing at CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. We're actually studying these issues, learning how to do these meditative techniques, and then applying the Vedic knowledge and the science of consciousness to extraterrestrial contact, making contact, but then understanding, equally important, how ET civilizations that are transdimensional may contact us, even if it is something bizarre, like, a conversation through electronic detectors. Or we had a man in Florida this past winter, was in his room where he was staying at a hotel. There was a microwave in there, and he was suddenly saw this blue orb that came into his room, and it went over, and then this being, invisible being, except it was sort of a light area, turned on his microwave and set up a series of numbers and kept doing this until he unplugged the microwave. Now, it's strange stuff, but it's something that you would expect, where the ETs are trying to say, yes, we can fully materialize and be a flying saucer or a triangular-shaped craft that's materialized and sitting on the ground. But on the other hand, there are these other ways that they contact us. And, of course, we've had both happen. We're actually getting ready a couple weeks to go over to France and the United Kingdom where, as you know, those of you who've studied our work, we had a fully materialized disc appear in a field on an 1,800-acre farm where we'll be in England this July. Back in the 90s, and yet at the same time, they can be in that form, but then shift their energy field a little higher and disappear to the naked eye, but be there present in a form that looks like an etheric energy or a heat wave that moves through the area or an energy disturbance or an orb or these sort of odd electronic transfers, which have happened at an escalating level, particularly in the last year and a half since Joshua Tree in 2008, when we recorded the big burst of the Orion transmissions, which are in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation. And I think that over the last year and a half, we have seen this sort of escalation of these transdimensional manifestations of the ET presence, including this ET that appeared right outside our circle that Raven Nabulsi photographed just a few months ago at Joshua Tree National Park. You can see that at CSETI.org, CSETI.org. And it's an amazing photograph. It doesn't look so great on a computer screen, but when you look at it on a high-definition TV, you can actually see that this is a person, a being, very large head, wearing some kind of night vision goggles, has creases on his forehead, and is looking right at the camera, and is in an illuminated cone of light coming from an orb that we had seen. And Raven had a 35-millimeter digital camera that she had the lens open for 3 or 4 seconds, held it very steady, and she connected with the ETs consciously and asked one of them to appear, and he did. So this is sort of astonishing what's happening, and I think it presages a ramping up of contact worldwide that's going to be occurring over the next a few months and years that all of us should be preparing for. And it's time for us to go from this kind of tribal state of our awareness into a cosmic state of our awareness. And that time has been emerging for the last half century, and it's really picking up steam right now.
You know, you just mentioned a little while ago a blue object, and that reminded me of the one night that 6 of us went back to our house after our field work. Late at night, we were having our debriefing session, and a little blue light followed us into the house and appeared by pretty much each of our faces or shoulders during the course of that debriefing.
Oh, yeah.
We could all see it.
Yeah, it was amazing. And that was actually a being that was with us. So I think that one of the things we always emphasize is that, we're sort of never alone. And once you open up a level of contact with these interstellar civilizations, and I think the reason for that, if you look at the world as a whole, there aren't any formal governmental initiatives making peaceful contact with these civilizations, and they're wanting that. And so if you put yourself at service to that purpose of universal peace, of peaceful contact, understand these higher states of consciousness and these transdimensional technologies, it's just astonishing what happens, because it's almost a nonstop level of contact in many different ways. Craft that are materialized, orbs that come through, beings that are in photographs, strange electronics that happen in the house, outside in the field, in the middle of nowhere. And I think that one of what I found is that as we started this project, back now, this is our 20th anniversary of doing this work this year. It started in 1990. Is that it really never stops, and it's this building tendency towards more overt and more profound contact. And, it makes sense, because if you think about it, there is not a UN program doing this. Even if I have met with senior UN officials because they want to know about this, no one has actualized a real-time diplomatic initiative. Same thing with the State Department. Hillary Clinton is not involving herself with this. Neither is the Foreign Ministry of Great Britain or China or Russia or Brazil or any other country. And I think in the absence of that, it's very important that we, the people, have our own citizens' diplomacy effort. A little bit like when Physicians for Social Responsibility, during the height and the darkest days of the Cold War, went over to the Soviet Union to create some rapport and rapprochement between people in America and the Soviet Union, since we were in the grips of mutual assured destruction and on the brink of thermonuclear war a few times. And I think that was a citizens' diplomacy effort that had quite an effect. And I think that's how we are viewing this, that what we're doing is a citizens' diplomacy effort. It's true that we don't have any official sanction, but we don't need any official sanction. I tell people, if they understand, first, that we're not alone in the universe, second, that these extraterrestrial civilizations are here observing Earth, third, that there are a set number of techniques and protocols and sciences that can be learned that enable people to make contact, and that then fourth, and most importantly, that if you make that effort, the ETs will respond, because there's no one else doing it. And this is a tragedy of a failure of our social and political system, and the fact that this issue's been ridiculed and marginalized and covered up for 60 years. But that doesn't change the fact that we as conscious beings can, in a sense, empower ourselves to do this, and that's what these CSETI.org training programs are for, is so that people can learn to do this. And in fact, what's happening is that hundreds of people, thousands of people have learned about this and have gone out and set up their own contact teams all over the world and have had astonishing levels of contact that we get reports on. And that's really what it's about on another level, and that is, as Rupert Sheldrake talks about and in the sciences of consciousness, that there's this morphogenic field that begins to propagate as a growing number of people do something. It recruits non-locally through this mysterious integrating aspect of this nexus of consciousness. It recruits other people into the capacity to do it, and it empowers that process. And so that even as we as isolated, unofficial people do this, it begins to open the door and pioneer the way and potentiate the time of open, diplomatic, peaceful contact where humans can go out amongst the stars peacefully. And a lot of people think that's very futuristic. And in reality, it's very now. In fact, it's very 1950s. And if we had done what we should have done and not kept this issue secret, as Senator Barry Goldwater said to me as I sat in his living room, he said, it was a goddamn mistake then, and it's a goddamn mistake now that any of this was ever kept secret. And he was, kind of a salty guy and very direct and blunt, but he was right. And I said, yes, sir, you're completely right. Now, what are we going to do about it? But I think that this is one of the things of what we can do about it. A lot of people throw up their hands and say, well, we can't fight this big, covert, kind of national security state that's become this transnational secrecy. And I say, yeah, well, actually, we don't have to fight it. We just bypass it. And here's how you bypass it. You learn to be a contact diplomat to these civilizations, and it isn't that hard to do. And secondly, you tell other people about it. And then thirdly, you link the secrecy on this issue to another big, huge problem. And that is, this is all two sides of the same coin, absolutely. And that is the existential crisis we're in environmentally, and it's a civilizational crisis. And you see what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico with instead of, I wouldn't call it British Petroleum, BP, anymore. I'd call it BP, beyond perfidy, because there's such deceit and lying going on with what this whole situation is in the Gulf of Mexico with this oil spill. But the bottom line is, forget a moratorium on deep ocean drilling. We don't need oil. We haven't needed oil for literally decades, if not the better part of the last century. But the secrecy that's surrounding the ET issue and the secrecy that surrounds these new energy issues are coming from the same worldview, and that is macroeconomic control, keeping people ignorant and keeping people hooked to a centralized macroeconomic system that the current energy paradigm is driving. Everyone's hooked into super tankers, whether you like it or not, bringing oil from all over the world so we can have our lifestyle. Same thing with coal. Even the nuclear power is still a centralized grid. The sciences that are behind these ET spacecraft and these advanced transdimensional manifestations, if studied and properly funded and applied into practical sciences, would give us energy devices that would run our home off the grid, our cars without a fuel pump, never needing to pay for energy costs again. But see, there's the problem, is that then the macroeconomic control, which 200 or 300 corporations, including BP, and individuals exercise over the global macroeconomic order, would begin to lessen and eventually dissipate, to where power, both literal and figurative power, would then go back to the people. And this is exactly what these large transnational and economic interests don't want to have happen, which is why this issue is kept so secret and why this subject is so ridiculed. And I think that the only way to get around that is rather than, as Dr. Brian O'Leary, who's an Apollo astronaut and very, very big supporter of our project and a dear friend, he would often say, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And he was right. But rather than just totally getting pissed off, do something about it, And the thing you can do about it is to learn to become a contact, an ambassador to these civilizations, on the one hand. On the other hand, advocate for disclosure and ending the secrecy. And the third part is help support the OrionProject.org, because we're trying to get the funding in place to open a laboratory where some of these brilliant scientists and engineers and physicists we've identified can work together to bring about these sorts of advanced sciences, because we know that they have existed. This time last year, Dr. Ted Loder, Professor Emeritus, University of New Hampshire, went out with our team to see some of the materials that had existed with Stan Meyer. And one of the things that no one ever talked about was this toroidal donut-shaped electromagnetic device that had a national security order slapped on it. And one of the scientists and engineers who were there when this device had a national security order on it was present when Dr. Loader went there and said, yes, exactly, and that's why the world never even knew that this existed. And since that time, the Stan Meyer collection, which we were trying to acquire, has passed over to some other group, and we hope that they do get it going and come out with it. But what I'm saying is that this is not an urban myth, that these sort of sciences and technologies have been around for decades. I mean, this was this particular electromagnetic generator that put out free energy was around in the 80s and 90s. And so, here we are 2010, still burning oil, still digging, drill, baby, drill. It should be drill, baby, kill. Putting these things, puncturing the Earth's crust at thousands of feet down to suck oil out when we don't need oil or coal or natural gas or nuclear power. And this is this is why when I look at the solutions coming out of Washington right now, even with what some would hope to be a relatively progressive administration, the solutions are all circa 1898. Windmills, clean coal, no such thing. I mean, these are all. So the question becomes, we have to understand that the secrecy around UFOs, the secrecy around these new energy technologies, and the fact that we're still, for the most part, sort of being being made into these passive consumer cows that just accept the status quo for what it is. We need to stand up and say, no, we're not going to accept this anymore. And we're gonna make contact directly with these civilizations and bypass the stranglehold the elite have tried to have on the issue and make contact, and we can. And when thousands of people are doing it, then it's something they can't control. And we have to demand disclosure of the facts and bring out these new energy systems. These three things are all part and parcel of the same issue. And the sooner we move on to accepting that responsibility and do something about it, the sooner we're going to find ourselves in a sustainable civilization rather than a terminal one. Someone was telling me about some Native American prophecies about the oceans turning black. And I was looking at one of the photographs or videotapes of Anderson Cooper on CNN out in the Gulf, just surrounded by this extensive area of just black, nasty water. And I thought about that prophecy, and I thought about the fact that here we are, doing this to this beautiful Earth, Gaia, who is a sacred being and conscious in and of her own right. She is a conscious being. And if we had no other way of living on the planet in order to have comfort and advanced civilization, it'd be one thing, but this is tragic because it's completely unnecessary. Just like it's tragic that the contact with these extraterrestrial civilizations isn't going forward officially, and the secret classified programs have turned it into an adversarial arrangements where they have weapon systems out in space targeting ET spacecraft, and they do. And this is why it's very, very important for people who are conscious and understand these issues and reasonably enlightened to say, look, I'm going to be a citizen, ambassador, and diplomat to these civilizations. And you don't have to be perfect. I mean, look, we're on Earth. None of us are perfect. I'm not. Linda's not. Dr. Bravo's not. But you don't have to be perfect to do good things. And if you wait till you're perfect, you're going to be dead. So let's face it, this is Earth. None of us are perfect. So you just need to put one foot in front of the other and say, I'm going to do something about this. And this is what people like Linda Willitts and Debbie Foch and Trudy Geiker and all the people who've been working on this for so many years have done. And I applaud all of you who have also stepped forward to assist with these projects. But I would encourage you also to get involved in making contact directly, because the more that people do that, the more it potentiates and makes smooth the path for our leaders to do it. Because you see, if the people lead, the leaders will follow. I really think it's very Jeffersonian in the sense that it really is about the people coming up with an idea and moving, and eventually then it will bring along the leaders of the world. I think that it's a very big mistake for us to look to the current leaders and say that they're going to fix all these problems. It's more likely that we, the people, will. And therefore, let's get on with it.
You know, that was the primary message you got at the contact site this year was, I have it written down, they said, we need you. We need people who understand and will do something productive about it.
Right, and that is what happened. We were, there's a site up on Blanca Peak, and if you've read Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, or the new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, there's a place up on Blanca Peak that's a very secluded site that's above where we actually have our circle that we go to once a week, late at night. And it was interesting. This year we were sitting in circle, and we had kindness fly over. And then shortly after that, right behind my chair, people who were on the other side of the circle saw this beautiful golden light come down, and then a beam of light come across the road behind me, which was exactly in the direction of this contact site that's a clearing up on Blanca Peak. So we went up there, and it's very spiritual, very transdimensional, actually. And the area was just illumined with almost a billion scintillating lights. It was like walking on the ground. You couldn't even see your feet. It was like you were walking in a sort of a foggy, etheric light. And one of the messages I got up at this contact site from the ETs, and these are the very, very enlightened ancient ones that have been around for probably millions of years involved with this planet. And they're physical and they're extraterrestrial, but they're very highly spiritual. And was that we need you, that the people on this planet, we're sort of the step-down transformers, if you want to look at it from an electromagnetic point of view, that can actuate the change on this planet, even though there's a lot of interest and support from higher dimensions and from interstellar civilizations. We're the children of Earth that have to make it real and make it happen. And it's through us, and so that's needed. And that's why you really can't look to your weaknesses or your faults or your limitations. You have to look to this vast potential that's within all of us. And I'm reminded of the Sufi saying that goes, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. It's a rhetorical question, that the universe is literally folded within each of us and within the cosmic mind within each of us. And so the potential is enormous. And we just kind of have to get out of our own way and do it, because if we contemplate our own weaknesses and limitations, we can't do anything. I mean, I guess if I had done that, having been raised the way I was in a very difficult childhood, I'd probably have been dead at age 17 of a drug overdose. So luckily, I never went that path with drugs and self-destructive things, but most people who were raised like I was did. And so you have to kind of transcend all these things that you consider yourself as being limited and say, I can do it, and that you have this sense of it's time for us to come together and reach our potential as a species. And, you know, the first step of that, I mean, the hallmark of us becoming a mature civilization is to establish peace on this planet and peace in space, universal peace, and to quit lying about all these secret areas of knowledge and sciences and allow what could have been on Earth 100 years ago with the genius of Nikola Tesla and others to come forward so that we have a just civilization on Earth. Because let's face it, there's no way to have a just civilization on this planet when you've got billions of people without potable water and electrification and who are in mind-numbing poverty, while the rest of us gluttonously suck up all the oil and destroy the biosphere. This is not a paradigm that's sustainable. It is not just. It's not spiritual. It's not even physically and materially sustainable, never mind in consciousness. And therefore, these are changes that have to happen no matter how much the cabal and the clique of very wealthy special interests may not want it to come to pass. But so long as we remain passive, why should they change? So we have to rise up, not in violence, but with action and with intent and with the purpose of, in a sense, being spirit warriors, where we aren't going to be intimidated by these sorts of craven interests that want, if they have $10 billion, they want $100 billion. If they have $1 trillion, they want $100 trillion. This sort of addiction and sickness to power. You look at a company like British Petroleum, which is, had an income of $250 billion a year, and they're cutting corners on safety to save a few million, and in the meanwhile destroying the entire Gulf of Mexico. This is ridiculous. So, at a certain point, we have to stand up and say, look, we can do better than this. But rather than fighting BP, I would say, let's put our energy into creating a whole new paradigm in consciousness, a whole new paradigm in society, a whole new paradigm in energy generation and how we live on this planet. And I think when we do this, which can happen, quite frankly, quickly, we're going to see the universe is going to open its arms to us quite amazingly. And I think that day is approaching. So that's what this is all about. And when we go to places like Mount Shasta in September, and I hope some of you can join us there, what happens is that many people have contact that's personal even while the group is having this group contact. And we always get the sense that the ETs assign an extraterrestrial contact or ambassador to each person there. Often we can actually see these luminous forms standing or sitting between each person in our circle. And there will be communication. People will actually be touched. We've had a couple of these events where, 2 or 3 or 4 of these ETs have fully materialized physically and walked around the circle. And so I think what people have to understand is that this is something that there's an interstellar coalition or an interstellar group involved with the Earth that are very interested in what we're doing, and they're watching, and they're very supportive. And I think that people, if they understand this, will say, well, I can do this too, because it doesn't matter who it is. If you're conscious and you're living on Earth at this time, you can learn these techniques of meditation, cosmic awareness, remote viewing, contact, these trans-dimensional sciences, and that's what this is all about when we go out on these expeditions. And then you really have a fuller understanding of what the actual physical sciences are, because the physical sciences are really linked to that. The people who've done work for the CIA and for other national laboratories that I know with these high-voltage hyperdimensional or transdimensional technologies have had experiences where there's an alteration in consciousness, objects materialize and dematerialize in certain bubbles that can be created that float across the lab. Amazing stuff. And this is, once you are out in the field under the stars doing this and you begin to see some of this, it then makes sense that there's a vast realm of energy that can be tapped into that doesn't involve burning oil that we're pulling up out of the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. That this is circa 1850s to 1890s paradigm in energy generation, and that by the late 1800s and early 1900s that there were electromagnetic geniuses experimenting with these things, but all that got swept away and kept secret. And it's time for that to change. 100 years of this sort of folly is enough, and I think that we can absolutely do it if we come together as a people and vow to make this change happen.
And you mentioned spirit warriors are needed, and this week for the first time we really had kind of a motif of warriors. Of Trudy Geiger had a very strong vision of kind of a headshot of a very detailed picture of, in person, a warrior from the past,
right,
that was coming to assist us in the future, and then you had a warrior appear to you as well.
Oh, very much so, a very enlightened being from another planet, but that appeared to be very much a spirit warrior, and not in a violent way at all, but highly spiritual, but also fierce in the sense of not being able to be intimidated by these sort of retrograde and backward people. And I think we're going to all have to find our own inner spirituality, but our own inner spiritual warrior to sort of stand up to this kind of tyranny and make this kind of change happen. We can't all just be passive and be rolled over. And one of the problems with that paradigm of passivity is that it may seem nice, but it's actually very cruel. It's really nicer to stand up and be strong in defense of the earth and in defense of those who are weaker on earth and who are in need. And that's what we have to manifest. And I know that many people who listen to the World Puja Network are, in fact, very deeply spiritual people who get that. And that's what we're calling to come together and do. Well, I think our hour is up, and it went by so quickly, but I'd like to thank Linda Willitts for joining me, and I'd like to thank the great folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks. Next time we're going to be talking about really deep concepts in consciousness and how to apply higher states of consciousness to practical events in everyday life, because we want to make that connection for people. So until then, thank you very much. This has been Dr. Stephen Greer, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.